You look very nice today.
Thank you. I dressed up, you know. No one ever dresses up anymore.
Says I didn't get the memo, man. Where's my tie?
We're about ready. Okay. All right, so we'll scoot around here. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our daily briefing. And today we have a fairly meaty topic with respect to some perspective on reopening. So I'm going to walk through how the city's handling preparations for reopening and the ins and outs of that, and also try and be clear about some expectations with respect to reopening. And I think in general we know it's going to be a different kind of summer this year on a lot of fronts. But we're going to walk through that today. I'm going to start, as usual, with some updates from our Joint Information Center. And so let me begin with that. And by the way, I do want to mention, too, here with us, we are going to have a couple of slide presentations. So for folks, we'll try and make sure that cameras can sort of see them. And we'll let you know when that's going to happen. And also our guest speaker is going to be our COO, Lawrence Rael, today to walk us through some of this issues around reopening. Okay, the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions announced that there are applications for unemployment insurance benefits for the self-employed, independent contractors, and the gig economy workers. That is going to open Sunday. This is something that I know all across the country as well as in New Mexico. Very excited that this process is going to start. And so this Sunday, folks who fall under those categories are now going to be able to apply for unemployment benefits. Now, also grant funds are now available to New Mexico farmers and ranchers and others in our agricultural system who've been impacted by market disruptions. For information on that, visit newmexicofma.org. Today, Early Childhood and Early Childhood Care Department and Children, Youth, and Families also announcing a series of Zoom-based presentations to support families and parents and educators during COVID-19. We're very fortunate to have that new department up and running at the state level. They're also distributing starter packs of personal protective equipment, PPEs, to early childhood personnel serving as essential workers. And we appreciate them for doing that. As a reminder, the city does this, and the city did get some PPEs for our workers at the City Early Childhood Centers. So that's already up and running. Distribution is happening again today at the Maloof facility in Albuquerque. That's from noon to 3, and that is 3401 Pan American Freeway is where that's located. And again, that's for early childhood care providers. A couple of updates on the city of Albuquerque. I want to remind everyone that last week we signed all our emergency orders through May 15th. So that is old news. But we're reminding folks now that the state also moved everything to May 15th. That's the date the city and the state are aligned on that and keying off that together. As a reminder, too, that also includes the city of Albuquerque's stay-home instruction for city employees. So just extending, again, what we've been doing, and that's pursuant to the emergency order signed last Friday. Now, we also know that cities around the country and the state are announcing furloughs, and we talked about this as well last Friday to direct people to the deep dive information we provided on our city budget. I do want to remind folks that on Monday we did get our $150 million check from the feds. The challenge is there are lots of strings attached with that. But we, again, have two firewalls in place, this federal funding, and we're going to make an ask to the state. And if those work out, or a combination of those, we're going to be okay, and we hope we won't have to do furloughs. If those two things do not come through, then we're going to have to look at furloughs. But I do want to remind folks that because of those firewalls, we're not going to be looking at furloughs, at least, that we won't even have the discussion or the analysis until June. So we're going to see how May plays out with respect to both these pieces, see how the special session goes, and then we'll make tough decisions if we have to. But again, nothing on the books right now in the short term to do that. But again, preparing for if we have to do it in the beginning of the summer. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about this concept of all things reopening. And I want to begin with the fact that the state shared some really good news yesterday, of course, that our efforts, our stay-at-home efforts, are paying off. Now, we need to do them longer, but they are paying off. And so I do want to highlight, this material actually came from the state, but I want to highlight Bernalillo County on here as we see our slide. We see the different regions. This is the curve. We've all been talking about flattening, and you can see the curve actually flattening. This is a great thing. And what we're looking for is the curve to actually be flat and start going down. So as you can see, we're making progress, but the curves, and we'll talk about this a little bit, are still slightly increasing. Again, we need to see that downward trend, and that's really going to tip us off as to when we can really start thinking about reopening. But I do want to compliment, of course, Bernalillo County. We've been doing a very good job, all things considered. Right. We know that we have, this is the dense urban center of our state, and so you would expect actually us to be doing the least good job. And I'm proud of Bernalillo County and of Albuquerque that we actually have been doing a very good job flattening the curve, staying home, following the orders. And that's really a good thing. And I think nationally that was unexpected. People didn't expect to see a major city doing so well. And so I'm very grateful to everyone who's been making this curve flatter by following the stay-at-home restrictions. Now, as badly as we just want to pick a date and say, when do we open up? It's clear the virus picks the date, not us. And I think that's also what this shows, right? We want to see a downward trend. Well, we don't even have that yet, which is why there is no specific date. Now, we do hope it's weeks. That's good news, as opposed to months. But the virus picks the date, not us. And so we're just going to have to continue to use data to inform our decision making and follow what's happening with respect to these curves. Now, I also want to remind folks that the price of opening up too soon is literally lives lost. Let's not kid ourselves with what these curves are. These are the curves of infection and therefore, as a percentage, death. So we know that the price of opening up is probably actually longer economic collapse and harsher economic collapse. So we've got to be very, very careful about when we think about opening up, both to save lives and to also make sure that we don't have to have a relapse where we have to close the economy again. And we're going to be talking about this throughout the rest of this morning, but all the models essentially show that there's going to be relapses. The key is, can we handle them? Can we digest them? Can we keep everyone else safe while we treat particular hotspots? But we know they're going to happen. And so this is not an on-off switch by any stretch of the measure. In fact, it's a long, bumpy road ahead. So we also want to make sure that when we reopen, it's about how we stay open. I think what we don't want to do is get in this habit of, it's like my kids, they're really into freeze tag right now. And we don't want to have a situation where we open the economy and then it's like, wait, freeze, for a couple of weeks. We know we're probably going to have to do that for specific areas or maybe specific businesses, but we don't want to have to do that for the whole economy. And the only way to avoid that is to get opening right. And again, to open so we can stay open. So we're trying to do the best that we can to stay open as in terms of where we're at today. And I want to highlight at least what we've been doing to in that limited fashion sort of keep doors open. So, number one, we're investing in areas of our economy that are still essential. This primarily is construction for us. I want to give everyone a heads up. Next week, you're going to see construction probably on Rio Grande, on 4th Street, and on Manal. And again, these are all in preparation for one, there's less people on the roads, but we're trying to push these projects up as well. We continue to do inspections for construction, and we continue to do permitting. So that's one area where we've been trying to keep areas open. And I also want to mention that we've been working through, again, the finance programs, whether it's our no travel policy or it's some of the contracts that we're canceling and so forth. We're trying to save money, our limited hiring efforts in that process as well on the city side. Now, we're also still hiring key areas, so we're very much still wanting to hire fire folks and people in law enforcement with respect to APD. So those hiring doors are still open, apdonline.com, and I would very much encourage folks, if you're interested in a career in public safety, and even now, if you might be some of the unfortunate folks who've been laid off and so forth, think about a career giving back to our community as part of our public safety team. Now, we're also trying to provide assistance to those who are being hurt. And so we've been working on the micro business fund, which helped 140 businesses not have to close permanently. We are doing the Creative Economy Solopreneur Program with $500,000. These applications are still open. That's cabq.gov/cultural services. And again, that's a way for us to keep our creative economy in some ways alive right now. And also we've been trying to invest in those who are helping those who are most vulnerable. And that's what we did yesterday when we signed the $1 million for nonprofits supporting Corona into law. Also, we're trying to help our local farmers through that Farm to Car program that is starting next weekend. So even as we work to try and do what we can under the auspice of all of these stay-at-home orders, we want to make sure that we try and contain and defeat this virus and bolster our economy with emergency relief efforts. And while we do that, we're trying to look to the future. So as the state mentioned yesterday, the city has been preparing for reopening. I want to emphasize that's different than reopening. It's getting ready to reopen. But this is an important stage that we're now in. And with respect to the city, here's some of the things that we're working on. First, we are convening our business stakeholders. We started that a couple of days ago, and we're continuing to do that with different organizations that represent the business community here in Albuquerque. I'm doing that personally, as well as we're in lots of conversation with mayors around the state, but in particular, mayors in central New Mexico. Mayor Hull especially and I talk often, and we're going to be gathering the mayors in central New Mexico to try and think through what reopening looks like for our region. And it should be no surprise, but I want to show a slide on this. You know, we often look at this health data with respect to counties, and we say things like Bernalillo County. You know, we all know in reality, both for the virus, most importantly, does not care about political boundaries. And economically, these boundaries aren't necessarily meaningful. And I'm specifically referring to the two boundaries we have, our boundary with Valencia County and our boundary with Sandoval County. And that's why the communities, whether it's Las Lunas or it's Rio Rancho, Bernalillo, they're very important, obviously, to the Albuquerque metro area. And so we're going to be trying to work on how we can reopen in a consistent fashion, hopefully, in the metro area. And so I do want to show, you can see too, that the growth rate is different based on some of these county measures. And so we have Bernalillo County here at 4% for our daily growth rate. And again, what we want to see here is 0, and then we want to see negative. That's what we're waiting for. You can see nowhere in the state do we see 0 or negative. So that's one reason why we can't open right now. But again, we want to see that trend. But I want to highlight the differences. You know, look at our neighbors in Sandoval at 7%. Now, Sandoval is obviously a big county, so that, you know, that includes more than Rio Rancho. But again, this is the challenge with using county data. And of course, Valencia too, another big county. But of course, our neighbors, especially Las Lunas, you know, we're all in that metro economy together. So we highlight this just to let folks know that we really want to think of central New Mexico as an economic and a public health region, as opposed to using some of these county boundaries. But we also recognize that the situation is different for every neighborhood, literally. So if there's an outbreak at La Vidiana, that's a big issue for Albuquerque. But if there's an outbreak at some of the senior centers in Rio Rancho, our community and their family goes to visit them in Rio Rancho, and we know this is true. So we are, you know, we like to say one Albuquerque or one metro area, and so it's very important that we think that way in terms of public health and in terms of reopening. So again, the virus doesn't care about lines on a map. And it doesn't matter where Albuquerque ends or Rio Rancho starts or the South Valley begins. And we're communicating with the leaders of those respective entities so that hopefully we can at least have good lines of communication and hopefully be more or less on the same page. Now, with that also, I think we've identified some clear criteria for reopening, and we want to emphasize that no one has all the answers yet. This is the reality of what we're all dealing with all across the country. But we do have some clear criteria, and we know that we're, again, looking for those numbers to become zero and then hopefully go negative. We know that we need to have testing capacity in central New Mexico. We also know that our medical system has to be ready in terms of beds and personnel. The good news is we've made progress on all of those fronts, thanks to all those entities that are involved and the state's leadership. And so we're in a very good position. But to jump the gun before we see this is a dangerous idea. And so we are very much in support of, right now, a wait-and-see approach. And we do know that by the end of next week and by the beginning of May, we should have some much clearer data, again, on which direction these curves are going. Now, I want to mention, too, before I introduce Lawrence to walk through some of these details, that we do have some core tenets that we want to follow with respect to reopening. And I think these are very basic. They're things that are being done around the rest of the country, but they're things that are very important. And they're also things that are new with respect to a lot of people's expectations. And I think the first tenet is that we've got to reopen in a staggered fashion. And there's different terms for this, but the idea is that you got to make some changes for a week or so and then see if cases go up or down and then make further changes based on that. And so we know all of May is going to be about testing these kinds of different ways to reopen. And so want to let folks know it's about, slowly sort of turning on the faucet, not just turning it all the way on, again, to prevent us from having to actually close again. That is a terrible idea for the economy. And the way to avoid that is to stagger that opening. Tenet number 2 is getting ready for those relapses. So the concept is if we go slow, we can also deal with relapses. And so we know whether it's senior centers or maybe it's a giant office building downtown in Albuquerque, there are scenarios we're going to have to close things for a couple of days to do sanitizing, to do contact tracing. And so especially in Albuquerque, we expect that to be very, very much a reality. A company might have a particular outbreak, a call center might, who knows what the issue is, but we need to be in a position where we can quarantine. We'll have to close down for a couple of days, that facility, but then we'll do contact tracing and then we'll get people back to work. And we got to be able to do that in a matter of days. And that takes a lot of coordination between our Department of Health, also, of course, the entity and our hospital system. And so dealing with those relapses is what we want to be ready for as part of reopening. Also, we want to emphasize that if we reopen, again, there's a new normal that we're all going to have to get used to. It is not going to be the way it was before, meaning that we are going to have to look at things like the percentage of occupancy rules and how densely packed different buildings and facilities or events can be. It means dealing with issues around masks, hand sanitizer, taking temperatures before you go in, and also living with this concept of contact tracing and quarantines when there are positive cases identified. These are just going to have to become hopefully routine for us from now all the way at least through the summer, if not longer. It's just the way we're going to have to learn to conduct business going forward. So again, we'll be fleshing out the details of that with our key stakeholders, both from the public sector and the private sector. Lastly, I do want to mention that Albuquerque regionally is unique. And we've said this pretty much every day I say this. And it's very true for reopening as well, meaning that we are the densest populated city in the state. We're the highest population. We have all the major hospitals. We have the airports. And so we know that this situation could be different in central New Mexico than other parts of the state. And that makes all the logical sense in the world, but that also means our response and our reopening plan might be slightly different. And so we expect that, we plan for that, and this is the same reason why we have to think about homelessness regionally, because we know that we get homeless from all over the region. We know that we get folks shopping at all our malls. This is, again, part of it is why a lot of us live here and what makes this city great, but it's also a responsibility that sometimes Albuquerque bears a burden for the rest of the state, and we want to be ready to do that as we always have been. So with that, I want to mention that all of this is, of course, subject to the governor's order. We respect that and we support that. And this is about us getting ready for what this means for Albuquerque specifically. So with more details on this, I want to bring up our COO, Lawrence Real. Lawrence.
Thanks, Mayor. Let me just say that what our city looks like during this period of late April and May is super, super important. It basically begins to set the tone for how we are going to move forward through the summer and bring some of our programs, if you will, begin to open some of those programs down the road. But I want to make sure that we're clear. Nothing is going to change, at least until the mid-May or when the governor decides to change the executive order that's in place today as it relates to the closure of facilities, et cetera. I want to also just talk a little bit about what the mayor talked about earlier, and that is that what does it mean to open up too soon? Well, opening up too soon obviously could easily mean a surge in cases, which means additional restrictions could be imposed, and probably even more strict restrictions than we already have today. And as a result of that, a huge impact to the economy of the state, especially to this area, the central area of New Mexico. We do not want to see that happen because these waves can create even more concerns for our business community, quite frankly, for all of our communities. It relates to just services and how the city operates and manages those services. So it is super important that we manage this, as the mayor said, in a methodical and in a process that makes sense, but also that keeps in mind that we are that the health of the community and the health of the state is paramount. As the mayor also indicated, this will be a very different summer for all of us. It will be a different summer for all of us here at the city, in particular, especially with all the city services and all the work that the city does to create a healthy and well-balanced community. So let me talk a little bit about what some of those, at least explain some of the expectations that we have and what that's going to mean as it relates to some of the programs that we offer during the summer. So for example, at this point, we are looking at the 4th of July has always been a major event for the city. It's an event that brings a lot of folks to the Balloon Fiesta Park. Well, obviously, we're going to modify that program. We're looking at how to create maybe what I would call a cooler event, if you will, perhaps a drive-up summer 4th of July program where people might drive up to see a display of fireworks in different parts of the city. We're working through that so that, again, we manage social distancing, but we also create an activity for folks to celebrate our independence. That kind of modification is what we're talking about as it relates to many of the services that we provide as a city. Also, it's important to note that Summerfest is another great community gathering programs that we offer for the city. As of today, we have canceled the Summerfest to the end of June. So we will not have any programs until the end of June. And as we move forward to July and August, we will see how things are progressing as it relates to the situation we have with the pandemic and make modifications as well. But at least through the course of the first part of the summer, we canceled the Summerfest events. We're continuing to modify our bus routes as the summer rolls in, if you will, and as if we begin to see that we're flattening the curve and lowering the curve, as the mayor described, we will start looking at how we modify our bus routes so that as businesses start opening up and as people start needing more and more public transportation services, we will make sure that our bus system grows at the same rate, if you will, so that folks can get to and from wherever they're going, whether it's a business, shopping, or going to hospitals or what have you. So that program right now, as you all know, has been modified to such that we only have Saturday service. As the summer rolls on, we will begin to open up that service as the businesses and as the community sort of begins to open up. Summer programs and recreation programs. Obviously, those are important. Obviously, keeping our children in our community occupied during the summer, giving them some good, valuable skills in terms of working, et cetera. We're working through those programs as we speak. We will be making some announcements as it relates to how our summer programs will roll out, especially for our recreation area, if you will. But again, right now, for example, our golf courses and our playgrounds are currently closed. As we start moving through the early part of the summer, beginning to open up some of those programs and some of those areas for our community to use. A good example with golf is that as we move with golf programs and opening up the golf courses down the road, there will be continued restrictions. For example, some communities now permit folks to play on golf courses, but everyone has to be in their own separate golf cart, if you will. They do not touch the pins, if you will, at the golf course, at the holes in the green. So some of those modifications we will make, and we will progress as we open up those facilities as well. But also, it's also very, very, very important that residents should expect that there will be policies around wearing face masks. The temperature checks to enter various facilities may be required. Lowering occupancy as it relates to the number of people at a particular event will also be part of this restrictions. Advanced scheduling for facilities. For example, the rail yards. At some point, if we have an event at the rail yards, if you will, for some a wedding or some kind of activity, there may be some requires for advanced scheduling and also some restrictions in terms of occupancy. As we all know, part of the reason why the mayor described the curve flattening and beginning to lower is because we know that social distancing really, really has made an impact in terms of how we deal with this situation with the corona. So as it relates to that, our social distancing measures will continue to take place through the course of all of our activities, making sure that we manage the number of people and the distancing between folks so that we can ensure that we don't have a surge and that we don't have to take the dramatic measures that we've already taken up to this point. Limiting openings for local retailers and other businesses are going to hopefully, opening them up will start soon as the governor's order is lifted, and we'll start making those, as the mayor said, with his conversations now with many of the local businesses to begin to look at a plan. How do we do this methodically? How do we do this in keeping the health of the community at paramount in our conversations, but beginning to open up the city, if we will, for our local retailers. Large gatherings such as festivals, concerts, sporting events, going to theaters, etc., will also begin to start phasing the opening of those and making sure again that we're talking to organizers of the events, folks that sponsor those activities, our retailers, our folks who are responsible for the movie theaters, etc., that they start also beginning to look at these restrictions that we have today. How do we open up in a methodical manner and ensure that, again, that we don't have a resurgence? In the meantime, we will continue, as the mayor had said a couple of weeks ago, we're going to continue, on the other hand, on the city to continue to move forward with all our construction projects, making sure that we can continue to do some of the work that needs to get done. It's been an opportunity for us, unfortunately, with this situation, but you take, they say in the farming business, you make hay while the sun shines. Right now, we have a great opportunity to go out there and fix our streets, do some work and some construction work, and keep our construction economy going. And so we're going to continue to move forward on those, and you'll see more and more of that happening here very shortly. All in all, it will be a very different summer. But as the mayor said, as one Albuquerque, one New Mexico, we can all continue to make the progress that we're making today and enjoy a summer that as I told my 14-year-old daughter, you'll always remember the summer of your 14th year. It is a summer that will be different, but it'll be a summer that will also give you a perspective that as human beings, what makes sense is that we all work with each other and take care of each other. And in many ways, that's what we've been doing as a city government, as a state, and we need to continue to pursue that. So with that, Mayor, turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much, and some excellent sea wisdom there. And it's very true. And so for us, we want to wrap up with a couple of things. Just to be clear on some of these items, we are planning our summer programs right now as normal in a sense of that they will exist, but they're going to be very different, meaning screening, different procedures, all sorts of things like that. But from a scheduling and preparation perspective, we are anticipating having those summer programs, most of them available, but again, in a different way. It's all about a different kind of summer. And so for us, that's what we're planning on. And again, there'll always be slight modifications to specific programs, even where they're located, how long they are, and so forth. But our team is working on that, and we'll be ready as planned to roll out whatever different kind of summer programs we're going to be offering in that new capacity. I also want to mention, before I wrap up, a small thing, but an important thing. We also are ramping up restaurant inspections. So want folks to know that we are again doing that, and we're actually going to be ramping that up as the restaurants obviously reopen. But also, it's spring, and this is a big time, we all know, for both mosquitoes and our good friends, cockroaches. So rest assured, the Environmental Health Department is ramping up for health inspections to resume as everyone reopens. And again, those actually have started already for businesses that are open. So we want to wrap up things with a couple of more high-level pictures, and I want to go to another slide. This particular slide is just a basic one from Johns Hopkins that really summarizes, these basic questions we're all getting. When is it safe to come out again? We get this question a dozen times a day, and it's basically about the spread not being very wide amongst the city. So this is all about that curve and all the numbers that we showed you. But look, when there's less spread, then we can start coming out again. Also, we need our strong healthcare system. That's why our governor and our hospitals have been working so hard on the beds, the ICU, the ventilators. All of this is about a strong healthcare system. And then that public health capacity. That's about, we know people are going to get sick over the summer, and we got to be able to quarantine them and bring them into the system. So those are kind of, at a very high level, three things that we're looking at. And then, of course, people are, when are we lifting social distancing? This is more, again, on an individual level. We talked about on a structural level. But on an individual level, it's when we know that the most vulnerable can get shelter. And that's why you see us using motel vouchers. That's why you see us opening up different types of shelters and having contingency plans for that. And again, having that bed space available. So that's a key component. And then another one is really prioritizing societal benefits. So in terms of the order in which we're opening, daycare, extremely important so that people can go back to work. Those are the kinds of things that we're tracking there. And then lastly, this is the faucet argument. So it's preparing to let the economy start dripping and then start flowing stronger, not just to flip it on. So that's a little bit, again, this is national, it's from Johns Hopkins. We just thought it was a really good summary, one of the best summaries we've seen of answering these two questions. Now, I want to also talk and wrap up about this summer. We are referring to it as a different kind of summer for a reason. In many ways, it could be a lot like a roller coaster. I want to show you another slide. And the reason why is this. Again, what we want to do is try and open in the right way and at the right time so we can stay open. But it means that there's still going to be massive ups and downs, we think, for central New Mexico. And we've seen this in Italy and in New York. Again, they're ahead of us. And then we've also seen how in Asia it has been dealt with in a way that doesn't close down the whole economy again. So that's the key. And basically it's like this, you tighten things up, that's what we've been doing. Then there's a big spike, that's where we live right now, where we're in. And then we're going to loosen things up. But we know there's going to be additional spikes on that roller coaster. And so that's why we might have to restrict things a little bit. But again, we don't want to totally close. That's the key. And that's what Asia's been able to pull off. And a lot of the other areas that have done this the best, they're able to restrict and then open without having to totally close. To get that right, we have to reopen in the best way. And so that's what today is all about. Now, with that, let's wrap things up, I think, with some availability for questions. And takeout lunch today is going to be Barella's Coffee House. Questions?
TJ kind of wants to know your reaction to other mayors across the state saying that they are opening back up. What's your reaction to other mayors across the state saying that?
This is my third elected office, and so I've learned in all of those offices, you never speak for other elected officials. So you'd have to ask those other mayors about those decisions. I know what's right for central New Mexico, and it's to follow the governor's orders. I would say this, there is no contest between who has more power, a mayor or the governor. So a good reminder that the governor controls the law of the land in our state, and I know that, and so does every other mayor.
Do you have any others?
Yes.
Okay. Nancy has one more, but it's on a different topic.
Okay. So we have one from Maida at Univision. Will it be mandatory to wear face masks and other items in the future, like gloves?
So the question is, will it be mandatory to wear face masks and gloves? And the answer to that question is, it actually is probably going to depend. So certainly for the general public, we don't foresee that. And again, that's why right now it's a recommendation, it's not a mandate. However, for certain professions, it absolutely might be mandated. And so that's one of the things we're going to look to our key stakeholders, other public health folks, and the business community for guidance on.
I got one from Nancy. Are APD officers being made aware of people they have to take into custody who have tested positive for COVID?
The question is, are APD's officers aware of people they have to take into custody? I know there's been some situations around this, but that's a specific enough question. I'd really ask APD on that one, and I'm sure they can get you that answer. But they're certainly aware of the situation and in coordination with the state police discussing how to do that.
Follow-up question from Maida from Univision. Is there a month or day that you are looking at with the highest probability to start opening up?
The question is there was it a month or day?
A date.
A day or...
A month or a date?
The short answer is, this is really important, I think. There is no specific date that anyone is going to be able to pick. The virus really decides that and are the shape of our curves. But the month of May is clearly going to be the month when we're going to do all this. And so I think that does give a real good window into when we've got to work through these changes and transitions. But I think it would be really actually inaccurate and disingenuous to pick a specific day at this time.
This is from Chris McKee at KRQE. Following up on Freedom 4th, is it fair to say that the city is considering eliminating the open-air grass seating component of the event this year?
The question is about Freedom 4th and what we're considering. Thoughtfully phrased question. We're considering everything. So absolutely we're considering that. What we're trying to consider is how to have a great Freedom 4th that is accessible for people, that also doesn't create a public health issue. And so we're looking at a lot of options, and that's certainly one of them.
Follow-up from Chris McKee at KRQE. In terms of gatherings, what about the Isotopes and United Games? Are you working with those organizations to schedule seasons?
So questions about kind of Isotopes and United, and the answer is, of course, we're working with them. The city owns the stadium, so we have discussions with them right now. Their leagues have taken their respective decisions for all the teams, and again, so far everything is postponed, and they're looking at what like a later start might look at. So I think right now we're in full alignment on that, and we're hoping that we might be able to do those kinds of things in the second half of the summer, but we're not going to know if we can do that probably until the end of May. Okay, well, we appreciate it. We will see you again tomorrow at 11:30. I believe we're going to touch on voting a little bit tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.